Just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my speed. My knees are drenching in the blood I feel just to get in. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I feel just to get in. When I look around me, everything I had went up in
Okay, good evening everybody. How are we all? We actually had like 7 people in here for a second, and now we're down to 3. That's okay. No worries. It is what it is. People don't want to stick around, that's fine. I'm going to do the reading anyway. Alright, so we are reading Fatal Alliance, and we're on chapter 20. They're fairly short chapters, so I'm going to try to get through 3, and we'll see how I feel at that point. Maybe we'll do 4. Alright, so Chapter 20. Shigar that's not a good start. Shigar had seen the spaceport on plans of the palace, but hadn't been there before. He moved quickly and carefully through the corridors of the palace, counting corners and noting landmarks while avoiding guards and security cordons. Getting lost or pinned down was the last thing he needed. Stryver would have farther to go, but he knew the layout better. If there was going to be another confrontation, Shigar wanted to have the advantage. Also on his mind was Laren's well-being. Again, he debated the wisdom of bringing her to Hutta. She had been a great help and good company too, but now she was hurt, possibly maimed, and that made her future prospects even grimmer. He swore to make sure her hand was properly tended, but was that enough? Had the kindness he had assumed he was doing for her turned into an intolerable cruelty? He was afraid of what his master would think when she saw where his judgment had led him. All the more important, then, to succeed with Stryver. The entire palace was in an uproar, which was to be expected after explosions in the lower levels, a fight in the security airlock, rogue droids running wild through the corridors, and the multi-level collapse Stryver had engendered. Conflicting alarms overlapped wildly, creating a head-jangling row that Shigar did his best to ignore. He could only imagine how Sabarish was taking it. The spaceport guards were on high alert. Shigar plucked a sentry from his regular patrol and used the Force to persuade him into revealing the command structure of the emplacement. There had been enough killing already that day. Besides, any evidence of a struggle would alert Stryver to an ambush. And Kasabarish was a junior nephew of the palace's matriarch. He oversaw the security detail from an office 2 floors away and was notorious for only occasionally glancing at the cam views. It was a simple matter to convince Ankasa that a completely unrelated crew member wanted to board their ship but had misplaced their clearance code. Shigar imagined the indolent Hutt wearily slapping his fat fingers on the right controls and then settling back into his hammock. Not even a palace-wide security alert could ruffle him. The main entranceway to the spaceport slid open. Shigar walked through, watching behind him for any sign of the Mandalorian. None yet. The doors closed, leaving him alone in the circular disembarkation area. Shigar had asked the droid which berth the first blood had been assigned to, and he headed straight there. The spaceport's umbilical door was open, revealing the gray skin of Stryver's ship at the far end. Shigar wasn't so foolish as to go anywhere near that inviting portal. It would be booby-trapped for certain. Instead, he waited nearby, in full view of both the First Blood and the spaceport entrance, with his lightsaber inactivated but held tightly at the ready. Stryver had to come for his ship sometime, and Shigar would be prepared. He emptied his mind of all concerns, every worry about Laren and his mission, every ache and pain, and stood poised and ready for action. The sound of repulsors activating broke him out of his trance. One of the ships was warming up its engines for liftoff. He circled the disembarkation area to identify which one, but the sound wasn't coming from any of the closed airlocks. It was coming from Stryver's berth. That surprised him. He had assumed Stryver was traveling alone. There could therefore be no one inside the ship to warm it up for him. Either Shigar was wrong on that point, or Stryver had activated it by remote. The repulsor whine continued to rise in volume. That wasn't just warming up. The ship was about to take off. Cursing under his breath, Shigar abandoned subtlety. Approaching the ship's outer airlock, he quickly examined it for weak points and found just one. The door was keyed to Stryver's biometric signs: height, breadth, proportion of limbs, and so on, but it also featured an override, just in case Stryver was ever grievously injured in the course of a mission, if he lost a major limb, for instance. That override could be sliced into by someone clever enough. Shigar wasn't as good a slicer as Laren, but he had seen this kind of trick before. Mandalorian ships had been Jedi targets ever since the Great War, and he had been taught over and over again the best way to disable them. Working quickly, he tapped a series of codes designed to reset the override function back to a commonly used default. When he typed in the default, the door slid open. Not a moment too soon, the repulsors were at screaming pitch, and the ship was hovering lightly on the ground. In another second, it would have been high above the palace. Shigar leapt lightly into the airlock and was swept upward with it. The moment his boots touched the floor, however, a secondary security system kicked in. Powerful electric shocks coursed through his body, sending his muscles into irresistible spasms. He fell onto his side, unable even to cry out. His jaw was locked open in a silent scream. The autopilot raised the ship straight above the spaceport and adjusted its trim. Shigar felt himself rolling toward the open airlock, but couldn't move a finger to save himself. The electric shock ceased the moment he cleared the airlock. That was something to be grateful for, as he fell like a stone to the roof below. How long he was unconscious he didn't know. Minutes, probably. Sufficient time for his helpless body to be gathered up by a roof security team, secured with binders at wrists and ankles, and gagged for good measure. When he woke, he was being transported through the palace on the shoulders of a squad of Gamorreans. Neither his lightsaber nor his comlink was within reach. Instead of fighting, he concentrated on casing his body's... What? Casing. Easing. I bet that's supposed to be easing. His body's many bruises and batterings. He didn't know how far he had fallen, but fortunately he had ended up with no broken bones. A ringing skull, yes, and a crushing blow to his dignity, but nothing worse. For the moment he was grateful simply to be alive. His captors whisked him at a brisk jog through the palace. He memorized the turns, but without a starting point, had no way of knowing exactly where he was going. His general impression, however, was of opulence increasing around him, not decreasing. When he arrived at a large space full of people whispering and talking, with one loud voice booming away in Huttese over the top of them, he guessed instantly where he was. The Gamorreans came to a halt in the center of Tsabarish's throne room, and with a coordinated grunt dumped him onto the floor. Silence radiated around him as people noted his presence. He clambered awkwardly to his feet and looked about. A large crowd of beings stared back at him, whispering and pointing. He saw no less than 20 different species in one quick glance, from trunked kubas to feline cathars, with bipeds occupying a pronounced minority. Their exotic origins belied their unified purpose, to pander and preen before the one who controlled their fates. Bona nai kachu, roared the matriarch of the palace. Dopa miki sitha pidunki kuchu. I hate it when they do that. It's really kind of annoying, but whatever. Shigar turned to face Tsabarish. She was sprawled heavily on a horrifically ornate throne bed at one end of the hall and decorated almost as ornately as it was. He didn't know enough about the Hutts to read her expression, but the quivering of her lipless mouth and the spittle she sprayed as she talked left little to the imagination. An A1DA protocol droid shuffled forward on spindly legs. Tsabarish wishes you to fully comprehend the certainty that you will be punished, treacherous Sith. Shigar considered his options. There were at least 24 weapons trained on him. Behind the crowd, armed guards ran back and forth, responding to various emergencies unfolding in the palace. He bowed as ceremonially as he was able, given his bindings. I must correct your mistress. I am in fact a Jedi. Stupa dopa maski kung. He ignored the insult. I can hardly have double-crossed you when we had no agreement between us. Beyond trespassing on your territory without permission, I mean no harm. Tsabarish rumbled threateningly, shifting to a different dialect now that she realized he could understand at least some of her words. Tsabarish says your intention was to steal from her. For that you must die. If you search me, you'll find I'm carrying nothing I didn't come here with. Tsabarish says your accomplices have made off with the prize. The Navicomp? The last time I saw that, it was in the grip of a Mandalorian, not a Jedi. Tsabarish says your treachery is surpassed only by your puniness. He stole it from you after you stole it from us. You are upset, Shigar said. Your judgment is clouded. A moment ago you thought I was a Sith. Perhaps the lie you think I am telling is actually the truth. The crowd muttered in consternation. Clearly, few people were bold enough to question Tsabarish's judgment to her face. The Hutt matriarch growled something long and involved that didn't really need translation. The droid rapidly blinked its round blue eyes and made a valiant effort anyway. Tsabarish is most displeased. She has devised numerous ways to use you for entertainment. Shigar didn't argue the point. He had finished counting the guards and exits and reached the conclusion he'd expected. There was no way to fight his way out of this one, and he couldn't rely on reinforcements. He would have to talk. He might even have to make a deal. That thought sickened him to the stomach. Your anger is perfectly justified, he said. Your palace has been attacked, and the property and information you plan to sell have been stolen. You've been deprived of the profit you deserve. No one would deny that you have a right to seek revenge, to make an example out of those who have caused you embarrassment and significant harm. He bowed again. All I beg is that you blame the right people. Another explosion ripped through the palace, causing great upset in the throne room. Tasabarish's huge eyes showed white around the edges as she waved a Twi'lek over to her. His comlink was squawking urgently. They hastily conversed, too quietly for Shigar to overhear. Then anger got the better of the matriarch. She backhanded the Twi'lek away from her and roared at the translator. Tasabarish wishes you to understand that the spaceport has been attacked, said the droid, its tapering head bobbing obsequiously. By whom? By Imperials. The Republic shuttle has been destroyed. Shigar considered saying nothing. On one level, he didn't need to. The actions of the Imperials had won the argument for him, by their blatant violation of the Treaty of Coruscant. But on another level, he was still in hot water. Tasabarish could have him executed just for being an irritation and an inconvenient reminder of her loss. He had to give her a reason to spare him, not kill him. He had to appeal to her business sense. We are both the victims here, he said, choosing his words with exquisite care. Killing me won't get the Navicomp back, and it will make an enemy of the Jedi Council. Either way, you end up worse off. Letting me live, however, offers you a way to cut your losses. Tasabarish asks how. Shigar swallowed. A bad taste had crept into his mouth. I intend to follow the Mandalorian wherever he goes. He has injured both my pride and my companion, and he will pay for these crimes. The information he has stolen might no longer be of value in and of itself, but every new world offers opportunities for trade and exploitation. In return for releasing me, I will ensure that those opportunities come to you first, before anyone else. The patriarch hummed a pitch almost too low for a human ear to hear. Her eyes didn't leave Shigar's face, but they had an inward cast now. Tasabarish is considering your offer, said the droid, glancing back and forth between them. I worked that out. She rumbled something, and the translator said, Tasabarish wonders how you intend to follow the Mandalorian when you don't have a ship, let alone directions. I'm a Jedi, he tapped his forehead, hoping to hide the fact that he hadn't the faintest idea on either point. We have our ways. A new wave of whispering spread through the crowd. Tasabarish says that your ways are insufficient. The investment is too risky. But the translator raised a metal hand. She says that in order to protect her stake in this venture, she must be allowed to provide you with assistance. Must be? The choice of words gave him pause. That was being forced on him. What was being forced on him exactly? Tell me more. The matriarch settled back on her throne, her eyes narrowed to slits. Tasabarish will provide you with transport. Her nephew will make the necessary arrangements. If you accept the offer, you may leave immediately. Shigar wondered what would happen if he rejected her offer. He mistrusted the matriarch's sudden satisfaction. Just moments ago, she had been seething with rage at the way her plans had been ruined. Had that been an act, or was this the act? All right, he said, following his instincts. Living right now was better than dying. That was the bottom line. And if he got even luckier, he might be able to do something to help Laren as well, assuming she was still alive. I accept the offer. The matriarch broke out into an enormous and unsavory smile. One chubby finger pointed at him. Uwamawanka. Tasibarish says, I know what she said. He swallowed another foul taste. She clicked her fingers and the guards dropped their weapons. A Gamorrean scurried forward to return his comlink and lightsaber. He fixed them to his belt and bowed. The crowd watched him silently now. Thank you, he said. It's been a pleasure doing business. As the guards led him from the throne room, a guest now, rather than a prisoner, the sound of the Hutt's chuckling, low and lugubrious, echoed and re-echoed through the Cyberitic halls behind him. I don't know what that word is. I've never seen it in my life. Sybaritic. I've never seen that word. That is the end of that chapter. That's chapter 20. So we'll jump right into 21. Sybaritic? I don't know. I have to look it up. Chapter 21. Are you feeling all right? Laren turned to look at the smuggler. She had left herself for a moment, left the ruins of the security airlock and the blasted droid factory, left the clamor of palace security digging through the rubble, even left the occasional pot shot at their direction from an ambitious Hook, currently stationed in the hole that short-sighted Yima had blown through the wall. Now she was back, and the view wasn't pretty. The answer came to her at last. "Are you feeling all right?" "Yes." They were hunkered down out of sight in the entrance of the vault. She was squatting on her knees, still applying pressure to her injured hand under her right armpit. The suit had sealed the wound as best it could, leaving her nothing else she could do about it now. She knew that well enough, having been injured in combat before. Once she had been caught in an intense urban guerrilla exchange with Special Forces Black Star Squad. Black Star Squad had been sent in to deal with. Okay. Intel had leaked, leading Laren and 3 squad members into a trap. She still dreamed sometimes of the way frag grenades had torn into the group, instantly reducing 2 of her friends to ribbons. She had been sheltered from the bulk of it, but even so, the skin down her right leg and side had been flayed completely away, along with a fair chunk of muscle. It had taken an extended period in a Bacta tank to regrow the tissue, and 3 months of rehabilitation to restore her to full flexibility. This was different, though, and it wasn't just because fingers couldn't be regrown. In the Black Stars, she had had many clear-cut reasons to fight, among them strengthening the Republic cause, enforcing principles of liberty and equality among all beings in the galaxy, and furthering her own career. She had thought herself perfectly normal in that regard. Why else did one join Special Forces but to be a hero on the side of good? She knew now that not anyone was like her. Every barrel contained a bad apple or two. She also knew just how important at least 2 of those principles were to her. More important combined than the last one. Sacrificing her career to uphold them had seemed the right thing to do at the time. Without her career, though, it was very hard to fight for any cause at all, and now her situation was totally muddied. Was invading a sovereign state, albeit one comprising criminals and murderers, the best way to go about enforcing freedom and equality? How did squabbling with Mandalorians and Sith over a battered Navicomp help the Republic? To whom did she owe her allegiance now, if not herself or her former peers? She didn't have good answers for any of these questions, yet she had lost the fingers of her left hand fighting for them. That made the pain worse somehow. "What happened to your droid?" she asked Jet in return. "Clunker? He's somewhere under that lot," the smuggler said, indicating the pile of masonry left in the wake of the thermal detonation. He had armed himself with a blaster dropped by one of the dead soldiers outside. "Don't worry, he'll be back when he's ready." "I recognize his model," she said, clutching at the fact as though it would explain everything. J80 soldier class. That's why he talks in combat signs, but they were phased out, weren't they? "Perhaps," he said. "I found him in a scrap heap 2 years ago. His vocoder was dead, and when I tried to fix it, he just broke it again." That proves how smart he is. He's worked out that if you don't respond to orders, no one can prove you heard them. That's a pretty good survival tactic, she said, for anyone in the Army. They leaned out of the vault to see if anything had changed outside. The Hook kicked up some pebbles nearby, but missed by more than a meter. Potanen's last surviving escort returned fire from the other side of the antechamber. He missed, too. Laren could have aimed better, even with just one hand. "What's your name, Private?" she called to him. "Hetchkey, sir," he called back. He was a young Keldor, and his face was mostly hidden behind a face mask and goggles designed to protect him from a harsh oxygen atmosphere. "Who told you to call me sir?" "No one, sir." He obviously didn't know anything about her past. She wasn't going to be the one to fill him in. The sound of digging grew louder. "Laren," said Jet, leaning in closer, "do you think we've been left to hold the baby?" "In what sense?" in the someone's going to have to explain this mess to Sabarish, and it might as well be you sense. Don't worry, she said. He'll be back. Who, your Jedi friend or envoy Vi? Laren looked around. She hadn't noticed that the envoy was gone, although now that she thought about it, she did remember Jet telling her something about Ula meeting them at the shuttle. It hadn't occurred to her to wonder when and how they would go about getting there. Ula had left before the security forces had sealed their only way out. I mean Shigar, she said. Jedi Knights always keep their promises. And what exactly did he promise you? She suppressed a sharp reply. What was Jet getting at? Sure, Shigar may not actually have promised to come back for her, but she knew he would if he could, and while Tasabarish's security forces amassed outside, there was nothing else she could do but trust him. She had given up trying to hail him on the comm link long ago. She stood up. I suggest... The sound of a distant explosion cut her off. The floor shook, and a rain of dust settled down on them from above. There was no way to tell where this latest blast had come from, so she finished what she'd been about to say. I suggest we look at this thing while we still have the chance. She crossed them to the miniature droid factory and peered inside. The swirling silver cilia were still now, so she felt safe assuming it was dead. She tried tipping it over to see the base, but it was firmly affixed by the wire-like threads that had eaten down into the vault floor like tree roots. A piece of the silvery alloy had melted off during the firefight in the vault. She picked it up and weighed it in her hand. It was surprisingly heavy. Let me get this straight, she said. This thing was on the Senzia. You found it in the wreckage and brought it to Hutta? Tasabarish locked it in here. It looked inert, but it wasn't. It sent out these thread things into the floor and began scavenging metal. It infiltrated the security system. It started building the droids. Ula called them hexes. That was as good a name as any for now. Maybe just one or two hexes at first to defend itself. It kept them hidden inside, like a nest or an egg. If you look into one of the hexes, you'll see they're not solid all the way through. They have a honeycomb structure. So two could easily fit in here if they were collapsed down. She poked the cilia with the barrel of her rifle. Two would be enough to take over a ship. Jet looked at her, not the droid nest. You think it was waiting for someone to win the auction and take it away? I do. The hexes would have emerged, overpowered the crew, and gone safely home. He nodded slowly, thinking about her proposition. I think you're partly there, he said. Given enough time, I reckon the hexes could have escaped from here on their own steam. Note how they emerged from the vault the moment everyone started fighting over it. The door melted like butter, probably thanks to wires like these. If everyone had waited just one more day, I think our nest here would have turned up empty. You might be right, she said. It's just a guess, he said, self-deprecatingly. Here's another one, she said, edging back to the door. If the homing instinct theory is right, then the hexes must know the way home. Jet's face brightened. So if we can get out of here with one of their brains, we won't need the Navicomp after all. They peered out at the body of the double hex lying on the floor of the vault. The laser cannon had blasted a hole right through both conjoined abdomens. The innards were blackened and melted, totally unsalvageable. Jet's face fell. Worth a thought, anyway. Laren leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Shigar sure was taking his time. Her blood sugar was low, and the endless pain was making her dizzy. The sliver of metal from the factory was still in her one good hand. She slipped it into one of her suit's many sealed compartments. At least they wouldn't return empty-handed. A disturbance outside distracted her. Someone's coming, called Hetchke. Laren propped the barrel of her rifle on the back of her left hand and trained it through the door. The mound of rubble at the far end of the security airlock was moving. Someone was clearly coming up through it, but was it Stryver, the Sith, or Jet's loyal droid? A scuffed orange hand Reaching out of the gravel to find purchase on a fallen beam soon answered the question. Told you, said Jet with a satisfied expression. Over here, mate, he yelled to the droid. Clunker extricated himself from the rubble and limped over to join them, utterly unmolested. The Hook had stopped firing. Instead of reassuring Laren, that worried her. There was no way to know what was going on outside their impromptu redoubt. She presumed the Hutts wouldn't leave them alone for long. Good work, Ketchke, she said, returning to the safety of the vault's interior. I think we'll have more company soon, so stay alert. Yes, sir. If the soldier was worried by that prospect, he didn't show it. Clunker was communicating with Jet via a series of rapid signs. Bad news, the smuggler translated. Stryver got away with the Navicomp. That's the end of that, then, she said, unable to hide her bitterness. The trail had gone cold. Any hopes she might have entertained about redeeming herself by means of a successful volunteer mission were now officially dead. What does he want with this colony anyway? Doesn't Mandalore have enough soldiers already? Doesn't Tasabarish have enough money? His cynical smile flashed again. I think Stryver wanted the Navicomp for two reasons. To find the Sinzia's origins and to hide its destination. That would make sense if Mandalore has been part of this right from the beginning. She stared hard at him. You might be right. Stryver knew about the Sinzia long before anyone else. It was him going around asking questions that tipped us off. And the Sinzia was on a diplomatic mission, but neither the Empire nor the Republic had ever heard of it. Can you name any other major players in the galaxy at the moment? She granted him the point. Even if the Mandalorians hadn't acted as a united body since the war, it wasn't inconceivable that they might do so again, for honor or the right price, or just because they needed a good war. Why did those things attack Stryver then? I don't know. And who saved the nest from destruction when the Sinzia's crew blew themselves up? I don't know that either. She shook her head. Every way I look at this, it keeps on getting crazier. Tasabarish had no idea, did she? The sound of grinding rubble came from outside the vault. Laren hurried to the door before Hetchke could call. The giant mass of stone blocking the far entrance was moving forward. Behind the crunching of rock and ferrocrete, she could hear a hissing and pounding that could only have come from dirt-moving droids. Okay, she said, this is it. If you've got any other great ideas, Jet, now would be the time. You've had your daily quota, I'm afraid. Well then, you'd better join me in hoping that Shigar turns up soon. Otherwise, we'll see what Tasabarish's hospitality is really like behind all the chintz. I suppose we could try to make a last-ditch break for it, he said. And go where? Well, there's my ship. I thought it was impounded. Oh, that. A small technicality. Like getting out of here alive? He winked. A man can dream, can't he? Levity in the face of unspeakable odds always buoyed her spirits. It surprised her how much she had warmed to the smuggler in their short time together. Maybe their cells would be next to each other in Tasabarish's dungeon. Maybe they would be stretched on adjacent racks. With a rumbling crash, the droids broke through the rubble. Once the way was clear, they retreated to allow the palace's security forces past. There were dozens of them, all heavily armored and armed, creeping forward across the exposed beams of the floor with sights trained on the vault. Laren almost laughed. Tasabarish had sent an army to capture just 4 people. It would have been absurd if she hadn't been on the wrong end of the equation. What do you think, Hetchke? She called to the Keldor soldier. We can try surrendering to them if you like. We haven't done anything wrong when you think about it. Your boss was actually invited. I don't reckon they're in the mood to care about that, sir. That was true enough. The ranks of Weequay, Hooks, Niktos, and Gamorreans looked as though they expected a whole army of Sith, Jedi, and Mandalorians to burst out of the vault and make off with their mistress's fortunes. If only they knew there were just 3 people and a droid, it hadn't even occurred to Laren to try unlocking the other 3 vaults. All right, then, she said. Wait until you can see the red of their eyes. Her opposite number among the security team was saying much the same thing, judging by the sudden tightening of their ranks. One enormous Weequay raised his right hand to give the signal to attack. At that moment, Laren's comlink buzzed. She froze, unable to fire and answer at the same time. What was more important, the last shot she might ever fire in her life, or the last communication she might ever receive? The Weequay had frozen too. A blue-skinned Twi'lek had appeared at the far end of the room, waving and shouting something in a language she couldn't understand. "Can you follow that?" she asked Jet. He shook his head. "Sounds important, though, whatever it is." No one was coming for them at the moment, so she took the opportunity to put her rifle aside and reach for the comlink. "Laren, it's me," said Shigar. "Where are you?" "Right where you left me. Tell me you've got a flip card up your sleeve." "I might just have. Has Tasabarish sent anyone to you yet?" She peered out at the masses of security guards. "You could say that." Go wherever they take you. I know what she has in mind." "You want me to surrender?" "It won't be surrender. We reached an agreement, she and I." Laren didn't like that moment of hesitation. What if he was under duress and walking her into a trap? She asked him, "Do you remember lightning season on Kifu when the static trees take to the air?" "What? Yes, I do. Spark dragons lure them into caves to steal their charge. I'm not setting you up, Laren. You can rest easy on that score." "All right," she said, keeping a close eye on the leading Weequay. He was yelling at the Twi'lek and brandishing his massive fists. "You'll be where they take us? Count on it." She put down the comlink and turned to Jet. He had heard everything. "I will admit," he said, "that I prefer resolutions that involve talking rather than shooting. So you think we should do this?" "I do, and Clunker agrees." The droid looked as though he was fully prepared to shoot his way out, but nodded stiffly. "Hetchkey, put down your rifle. When I say so, we're coming out." Yes, sir." "Wait for the signal. If we get the timing right, I think we've got a good chance of surviving this with a little class." The Weequay shook his hands overhead one last time, then let them fall to his sides. The Twi'lek looked satisfied. The Weequay turned to his troops and grunted a series of commands. The security detail rose to its feet one at a time and lowered their weapons. "Right," said Laren. "That's our cue. Put down your blasters, but keep your hands at your sides. We're not surrendering." She stepped first out of the vault, and the Twi'lek came to meet her. "I am Sagrillo," he said with a short bow. "By the order of Tasabarish, you are free to go." Laren kept her relief completely hidden. "You better believe it." "And me?" asked Jet hopefully. "Alas, Captain Nebula, my mistress still has need of your services." The Twi'lek bowed again. "If you will accompany me, please, all of you, I will take you where you are required to be." Laren fell in behind the Twi'lek, with Jet beside him. Clunker and Hetchkey brought up the rear. The only sound was a subterranean growling from the Weequay as the security detail parted before them. Laren considered tipping him a salute farewell, but thought better of it. She glanced at Jet. Apart from the slow clenching and unclenching of his jaw muscles, he showed no emotion at all. And that is the end of that chapter. Hey, Nambro, how's it going? Thanks for stopping in. Okay, so jumping into chapter 22. And I bet you it's only a few pages. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. 1, 2. Yeah, it's like 4 pages. So depending on how my voice feels at the end of this one, I might do one more chapter tonight. We're coming up on halfway through the book at 22 chapters in. All right. Chapter 22. Ula sat in Enkasa Barish's office and tried not to weep. He should never have come to Hutta. He should have argued with Supreme Commander Stantors and made him send someone else. It didn't matter how it would have looked. He would happily take a greatly diminished position of responsibility in the Republic's military administration rather than endure another minute in this slovenly disaster area. From the moment he heard the name of the accursed Cinzia, everything had gone wrong. First, he had been kidnapped and interrogated. Then he had been caught in the crossfire among a Sith, a Jedi, and a Mandalorian. Then the brutal hexes had almost killed him. And now? He put his head in his hands, barely able to think of it. From outside the office came the sound of constant commotion. The destruction of the Republic shuttle had damaged the palace's spaceport. Fire and repair crews ran backward and forward, shouting at one another and into comlinks, requesting reinforcements. Ula didn't offer to help. The palace could burn to the ground with everyone in it for all he cared. The chances of Laren Moxla still being alive were slim indeed. Of that he was completely certain. He wasn't proud of himself for running from the ruins of the security airlock, even though he had been sure at the time that his motives were pure. His performance as a Republic envoy had never been convincing. Jet had seen through him straight away, even if he hadn't outright named him an Imperial spy. Better let that life disappear and start a new one in the Empire, where he could spend less time worrying about who other people thought he was, and more on actually doing the right thing. Getting through the spaceport guards hadn't been hard, even after the unexpected departure of Dow Striver's scout ship. They remembered him from his arrival and let him through. He had approached the Imperial dock without hesitation, confident that the guards would allow him admittance. It hadn't gone that way at all. The shame of it still burned. His fellow Imperials of a junior rank, what's more, had turned him away, recognized him as belonging to a near-human species rather than pure-blooded like themselves. Epicanthic scum, they had called him. You belong in this hole, they told him. Go away before we shoot you dead. He had staggered out of the spaceport, stunned by the sudden reversal. If his own kind wouldn't take him in, who would? Barely able to think straight, he had wandered in circles around the neighborhood for what had felt like days, but couldn't have been any more than an hour. His choices were limited. He could either go back to the Republic and his old job under Supreme Commander Stantors, if he wasn't sacked for failing to so miserably in his mission, or do as the Imperial Guards had suggested and stay on Hutta. The latter he simply would not do. When he returned to the spaceport, determined to take his leave of the planet forever, he learned that the Republic shuttle had been destroyed. Bad enough that his fellow Imperials had rejected him, now they had destroyed his only means of getting off-world. He had been so wrapped up in his misery he hadn't even heard the explosion, and he bore the news that things had gone from bad to worse with a distressing lack of grace. Luckily, the situation wasn't without hope. The Imperials' blatant breaking of the Treaty of Coruscant might, on more civilized worlds, have resulted in all-out war, but on Hutta it was likely to be ignored along with the many other infringements perpetrated by the Sith and the Jedi that day. Furthermore, Ula's status as a Republic envoy still carried some weight. Tasabarish's nephew had installed Ula in his fetid office, a place of leathery drapes and entirely too much velvet, with living things crawling all over the desk, and left him there to sort himself out while the spaceport dealt with much more important emergencies. Ula couldn't blame him. The only person Ula blamed was himself. If he hadn't run away like a coward, he might have been able to make a difference to the mission's outcome. Laren was very capable, but she was also wounded, and now with Striver and the Sith gone, one of them presumably with the Navicom, and the guards outside babbling about the Jedi someone had captured, Tasabarish was unlikely to show anyone involved the slightest clemency. He himself expected a wrathful backlash. All of Hutt's space would quiver until she found a way to mitigate her losses. A swarthy Weequay burst into the office. He didn't knock. His face was melted into a permanent sneer. Up, he said, poking Ula with his force pike. Ula's stomach sank. Here it came. the moment he had been dreading. How would Tasabarish deal with him? If he was lucky, it would be quick. If he got what he deserved, it would be exceedingly slow. The Weequay poked him again, and he rose wearily to his feet. Several tiny lizards fell squeaking from his back and crawled off under the couch bed. At least he thought he would be leaving this ghastly menagerie behind. He was led out into the spaceport where Nkasa Barish and a clutch of Gamorreans were waiting, ceremonial axes at the ready. In their midst was a dirty, beaten man whom Ula didn't immediately recognize. A crude bandage staunched the flow of blood from a wound on his left arm. A dozen other small cuts and grazes had been left unattended. Envoy Vi, I don't believe we've been formally introduced, the young man formally said. I'm Shigar Conchi, Jedi Padawan under Grandmaster Satil Shan. Ula was so surprised by the unexpected deference that it was difficult to respond in kind. I thought you'd been captured. I was. So what are you doing here? I'm waiting for... He glanced over Ula's shoulder. Yes, here they come now. Ula turned and took in the scene behind him. If he'd been surprised into rudeness before, he was utterly speechless now. Laren Moxla led a procession of a Weequay, a Twi'lek, Jet Nebula, and his droid, and one of Patanan's surviving guards. They weren't being shoved along. They weren't in binders. Like Shigar, they were being treated more like guests and prisoners. Nice to see you again, mate, said Jet, tossing him a casual salute. If you're the one who talked us out of that mess, I owe you a dozen reactor cores. Not me, Ula turned helplessly to Shigar for an explanation. I cut a deal, the Padawan said to all of them, although his eyes kept returning to Laren. Tasabarish is letting us go. That's suspiciously generous of her, she said. Yes, well, there's a catch. Shigar pulled an unhappy face. I'll tell you when we're on our way. You have a lift, too? Asked Ula, hope beginning to bloom. Better than that, Shigar said. I have a ship and a captain. Anyone we know? Asked Jet hopefully. The Twi'lek addressed Jet in clipped, officious terms. The great Tasabarish has instructed her nephew to release your vessel, but your contract with our employer remains in force. You will provide passage for the Jedi and his companions to destinations of their choosing. You will not cut and run the moment you leave our airspace. You will return from the information with the information gathered and provide said information in full. Any fiduciary losses incurred during this expedition will be your responsibility. What about the profits? They will be distributed the normal way. Jet grimaced. Ula guessed that the normal way meant all for Tasabarish and none for anyone else. Not much of a deal, Jet said, and, well, call me a stickler for details if you like, but I don't remember there ever being a contract between us. The Twi'lek smiled. There is now. I guess that's the catch, said Laren. Well, said Jet, at least we're alive and soon to be in motion. There's nothing that can't be solved, I've found, with the application of a little velocity. He winked at Ula, who was still too shocked by the sudden turn of events to manage a natural expression. Where are we going exactly? He asked the assembled group. After Stryver, said Shigar, and the longer we stand around here, the bigger the lead he'll have. He bowed to Sabarish's nephew, who grunted something in reply. The Weequay and Gamorreans dispersed, marching with heavy tread off to pursue more important tasks. When the spaceport doors opened to allow them admittance, Jet took the floor, whistling jauntily as he led them to his berth. Don't expect much, he said. The Auriga Fire is a loyal old thing, but has seen better days. Like you, eh, old buddy? He clapped Clunker on the shoulder, prompting a rattling noise that disappeared down the inside of the droid's left leg. It'll get you from A to B, but I can't speak to anything much else. He stopped at the disembarkation ramp, where a series of carry bags had been lined up. Hello, he said. Who might these belong to? I think they're mine, said Ula. His quarters had obviously been emptied while he had wallowed in self-pity. in Casa Barish's office. So you're joining us, Envoy Vi? Jet asked with a knowing gleam in his eye. Yes, he said, if that's not inconvenient. I can't guarantee that you'll get back to Coruscant any time soon. That's okay. I would very much like to leave here immediately. Right you are. Jet keyed an elaborate code into his berth, then another into his ship's airlock. The hull was pitted and scarred with dozens of micrometeorite strikes. Ula fretted about the state of the ship's particle fields, but supposed that if Jet had survived this long, they couldn't be that bad. The airlock slid open. Jet waved him up the ingress ramp. After you, then. Mind the step. Crew quarters to your right. Guess that's what you qualify as now. Another typo. Someone's got to help me fly this thing straight. Ula grabbed a carry bag as he went by. His sole remaining escort did the same. The ramp creaked and swayed. He wrinkled his nose at the stink emanating from the ship's interior. It smelled like stale rhodium. The Auriga fire would undoubtedly be a far cry from the official transport he'd enjoyed on the way to Hutta. Still, he didn't care. Utter disaster had somehow been avoided, and for that he was grateful. He was alive, and so was Laren. He had clean clothes and transport. There was even a chance he might be able to return with information for his masters on Droman Kaas. When he thought back to the despair he'd been feeling just minutes ago, his present circumstances seemed positively optimistic. Stang! Jet's warning forgotten, Ula stabbed his toe on the top of the ramp. The Auriga Fire was by no means a luxury vessel. From above, the stocky freighter was almost perfectly triangular, with hyperdrives at the base, sensor arrays, shield generators, and comms at the upper point, and a cockpit slightly off-center in the middle, above the main holds. Its low, cramped corridors were arranged in a rough Y, with main hold crew quarters for 5 and a cramped engineering bay at the termini. The cockpit was one level up, accessed by a ladder. Additional holds filled every available piece of ship space, including some, Ula was sure, that weren't visible to the naked eye. Jet claimed to have a crew of 10 on the run that had encountered the Sinzia. Ula wondered how they had all fit in. The ship was hardly understocked in terms of equipment. On the short journey back from the refresher, Ula spotted a tractor beam, a crude interdiction device, and power supplies for no less than 4 tri-laser cannons. Thick cables suggested that the shields were well supplied with power, too. Jet might talk down its capabilities, Ula decided, but the ship could undoubtedly hold its own. There was just enough room for everyone in the cockpit. Shigar had the co-pilot's seat. Laren had clocked more flight hours, but until her hand was properly treated, she was relegated to astrometrics. Clunker had patched himself into the ship's flight control systems and shut down his photoreceptors. That left Ula and Hetchke to ride out the short hop to orbit in the passenger seats. As the brown atmosphere faded away to stars, Ula instantly felt lighter, both physically and in spirit. Jet deftly guided the ship into a stable parking orbit and put it on autopilot. Then he swiveled in his seat and folded his hands behind his head. Now for the 10 trillion credit question, he said. Where to? Everyone looked at Shigar, who shifted awkwardly in his seat. Easier asked than answered, I'm afraid, he said. Tassal Barish thinks we're going after Stryver, so I guess that's what we have to do. Why don't we just run? Ula asked. I can't, said Jet. Because of a made-up contract? Because she'll hunt me down and nail me to her wall if I do. She's planted a homing beacon somewhere on this old bucket, I'm sure of it. That's what I'd do in her shoes. So we go looking for Stryver, said Laren. He'll head for the Hex's home for sure. If we had the Navicomp, said Shigar, we'd do the same. He has to crack the cipher first, said Jet. We had to go had a go or two at it on the way to Hutta without any luck. Is there any other data we haven't been given? For instance, when you interdicted the Senzia, could you tell from its trajectory where it originated? Jet shook his head. We tried that too. Project the ship's route back, and you get empty space to the edge of the galaxy, and then a lot more empty space after that. Same with everything else we picked up. It all points nowhere. They were smart, said Laren, and they really wanted to stay hidden. I wonder why. They pondered that question for a moment in silence. Ula had no insight to offer into the psychology of Lima Zandret. The hexes were remarkable and strange, but that alone didn't reveal anything about the people who had made them. Or did it? On Panatha, Ula's great-great-grandfather had been fond of collecting ancient Palawan sayings. What you do speaks louder than what you say was one of them. Another was, what you make makes you. Applying that philosophy to their present situation seemed impossible to Ula, until he remembered something Yima had told him. The thing that built the hexes, he said, the nest. It was made of a strange alloy. What was it? Lutetium and promethium, said Jet. So they're rare metals. There can't be many worlds where both are found, right? Jet poured cold water on this spark of an idea. There isn't a single surveyed world with those metals in abundance. What about wild space? There are lots of unsurveyed worlds in there. Sure, but it's a big place, and they don't call it wild for nothing. Ula sagged back into his seat. How did you convince Tassa Barish you had the slightest chance of finding this place? He asked Shigar. It seems hopeless to me. Shigar looked embarrassed. I reminded her that I'm a Jedi. I told her we have our ways. Laren reached into one of her suit's compartments and lifted out a strip of silvery metal. This is how we're going to find the planet, she said triumphantly, offering it to Shigar. This and your mysterious ways. Shigar's eyebrows went down in confusion, then down even further in a frown. No, he said, pushing the metal away from him. It won't work. It has to, she has insisted. You told me about your psychometric ability. My unreliable psychometric ability, Laren. And that your master thinks you can tame it. What better time to try than now? No better time, he agreed. But you can't make it work just by wanting it to. I trust you, she said, with unaffected candor, and you haven't let me down yet, not even once. I don't expect you to start now. That stopped his protest. He reached out, took the shard of metal from her hand, and held it up to the light. It gleamed like a metallic diamond. Is that what I think it is? Asked Ula. It's a piece of the nest, she confirmed. And Shigar can use his mind to find out where it comes from? I can try, said Shigar sternly. That's all. I can't promise anything. Well, it's a start. How long will it take? I don't know. I'll talk to Master Satil first. She might be able to guide me through this. Can you put a call through to Tython? Faster than you can ask me to. I'll take it in the main hold, he said. There's a holoprojector there. Shigar got up from the co-pilot's seat. Jet fiddled with the instruments in front of him, opening up comm channels and shunting data from the ship. Laren was sitting thoughtfully, eyes staring blankly at the ladder down which Shigar had disappeared. A tiny worry line creased the bridge of her nose. Ula leaned in to whisper, You don't really think he can do this, do you? Her green eyes focused on him. There's only one thing I think, she said. If he doesn't even try, that'd be worse than failing. Ula could only nod in the face of her unswerving integrity and wish that he possessed half of it. Now, she said, I have to get this glove off and look at my hand. In the absence of a field medic, I need one of you two to help me out. Private Hetchke, Envoy V? I'll do it, said Ula quickly. You stay here and back up Jet in case he needs it, he told Hetchke. Medkit's in the aft airlock, Jet called out. Let me know when you have a destination and I'll get this crate moving. Will do. Laren headed for the ladder and Ula followed her, frantically dredging up everything he'd learned about medicine from a brief training session on Droban Koss years ago. And that is the end of that chapter. And honestly, unless this is a really short one, I don't think my voice is up to it. So let me see. And it's not long, but by the standards of this book, it's normal. It's if it was even a page shorter, I would consider it. But no, I'm just gonna end it there. Let's see who's around. Where's my thing there? Okay. Yeah, there's nobody on that I follow that. Ren Flames is on and Alyosha are on, but they've been doing these constant streams of just past stuff. I'm not rating that. Um, and everything else is D&D that's going on right now. So I'm just going to end it there, and I will see you all tomorrow night for the end of the 12th planet. I should be able to finish that whole book tomorrow night, and then by Friday I will have chosen the next book. And I've got like 3 in mind that I'm kicking around. So I'll figure it out by then, and I will see you tomorrow night.
I'm just calling to say I calling to say I